ESPN.com NBA insider Kevin Pelton will join us as he grades the trade over at ESPN.com. The Sixers get the number 1 overall pick. Did they give up too much? Did they make a good deal? Who wins the deal? Could it be one of those where both make out? Kevin Pelton joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. So, Kevin, we did get the details on the trade, which were a little different that was reported the other night in terms of that Sacramento pick in 2019, depending on what happens with the 18 pick. That changed a little bit. But overall, to go from 3 to 1, what did you think about what the Sixers had to give up?
So, I mean, from a pure value standpoint, I looked at this before the trade was consummated. What's the typical value of the number 1 pick and the number 3 pick? Usually the difference between those is about equivalent to the 13th pick in the draft. And, if the Lakers pick conveys next year, obviously by definition, it'd have to be in the top 5. It'd have to be better than that. And I think it's very likely that Sacramento's pick in 2019 is going to be better than the 13th pick. But from Philadelphia's standpoint, I mean, I think, you could look at it as this is not a typical difference between a first and a third pick, because not only do we think that Markelle Fultz is a really good first pick, we think that, the guys who are going to be available with the third pick don't fit our roster particularly well. So, there's sort of a middle ground there where both teams can, based on their evaluation of the draft board, and this is sort of what the GM said today, I think, both teams can get value out of this trade because of the different ways they view the draft.
Yeah, it seems that the trade is made from two different perspectives, where Boston is in their franchises, where they're going, and where Philadelphia is. Philadelphia is a little bit behind Boston, and they're more willing to take a younger player and build with, whereas Boston views number 3 as an ability to maybe spin off to get a veteran player because they feel they're closer than Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were purely looking for the trade value standpoint, you would probably the number 1 pick would have more trade value in a trade for a veteran. But what turning it into 2 draft picks, one of them in the future, does is allows you to use that pick, go through this summer, figure out what they're going to do, and still have future picks that you can send to teams. Not only this pick that they got wherever it lands, but also then next year's Brooklyn pick. So they still probably have the best trade chest of draft picks of anyone in the league.
Kevin, Colangelo said today, look, we had 4 picks, now we have 3, and that was, based on the fact that they had so many, he said you can only make so many picks, and keep in mind, they got this pick.
And that they were using house money.
Right, he said house money, and they essentially got this pick for Michael Carter-Williams. I mean, this was the pick that never conveyed that they, the fact that even if they overpaid, are you okay with that based on the fact that they had so many assets to be able to make a move of this ilk?
I am, yeah, for that reason. And, because of the fact that I probably liked Jonathan Isaac a little more for the Sixers at 3, since I'm much higher on him than almost anyone else. But yeah, I mean, clearly the options that they had at 3 were not guys who ideally made sense with the rest of their core players, and Fultz does.
Talking with Kevin Pelton, before we get down to some other scenarios, I know that you are up there in the great Northwest there. Have you seen a lot of Fultz? I mean, we're assuming he's going to be the number 1 pick. Is he warranted and a good fit for Philadelphia?
So for sure, I saw a lot of him this year. I saw, all but 2 of his Pac-12 home games, as well as a couple other games in person. And I think he's a very good prospect. Few weaknesses from a statistical standpoint. There's really not anything that he doesn't do particularly well in terms of a skill. I actually tend to prefer Lonzo Ball as the number 1 pick, just because I think he has, more transcendent skills than Fultz does. But Fultz is the much more conventional NBA prospect. You plug him into the pick and roll, he'll be very effective in that. Also, probably a good enough, 3-point shooter to be effective playing off the ball alongside Ben Simmons when Simmons is running the offense. So, I certainly see everything the Sixers are seeing in him.
Do you have issue with them only winning 9 games?
No, because I watched that team play, and part of it was after he went out for the season that they were largely non-competitive after that point. But, people have made the comparison to Ben Simmons, where that LSU team didn't make the NCAA tournament last year either. and obviously was a more competitive team. But, Ben Simmons had some other NBA guys around him. They had Tim Quarterman, who played for the Blazers last year. I think Antonio Blakeney is, a fringe second-round prospect in this year. It would be a little surprising at this point if anyone else from last year's Washington roster plays in the NBA.
Kevin, there was a report out there that Chicago might have been shopping Jimmy Butler for that third pick. Would you have done that and if you were the Sixers rather than go for Fultz and all the things they gave up?
It's an interesting question. I mean, first off, I'm going to have to assume that it was more than just the third pick, based on what reportedly the Bulls were looking for in their negotiations with the Celtics at the trade deadline, where it was, that Brooklyn pick plus a couple of veteran starters, probably talking about Jay Crowder and Avery Bradley. So, they want a lot for Jimmy Butler. From a timeline standpoint, if you're acquiring Jimmy Butler, you're doing it to try to win now. He's got, a couple years left on his contract beyond this before he can become a free agent, and you'd have to try to re-sign him. And he'd get very expensive. He's a little bit, he's in his prime right now. By the time that guys like, Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are reaching their peak, then, Jimmy Butler's going to be past it. So I think from that standpoint, it probably does make more sense to bring in another young player.
Yeah, and Butler would have been interesting. Some can make the argument that, when you look at this draft class, did Fultz fit the Sixers roster the best?
I actually kind of like Ball's fit with them a little bit because I think he can be really effective playing off the ball with his shooting ability, his cutting, and then, the fact that if you swing the ball to him, he's the kind of guy who's going to be able to find the open teammate very quickly. But, I think him in those two guys really stood out much more than, any of the other top prospects in terms of making sense with the Sixers.
What would you think of this from Boston's perspective? I mean, if you're Boston, would you have just stayed there and made the pick, or did you like the fact, that they were able to move back? Reportedly, they like Jackson more so than Fultz, or the fact that they like their backcourt or are comfortable with their backcourt, didn't think they needed the position that Fultz would fill for them. Did you like, Ainge getting creative in that manner?
I mean, it's interesting for their future because of the fact that you've got both Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley becoming free agents after next season. Both of those guys are going to get huge raises. But on the other hand, they are, important parts of what the Celtics are doing right now. And, eventually you'd probably have to move one of those guys to make room for Fultz in the starting lineup if he becomes what you expect. I'm not as high on Josh Jackson as Danny Ainge is, or Jason Tatum, whoever that guy ends up being for them at the third pick. At the same time, I think that it really comes down to how good this pick they get from either the Lakers, the Sixers, or the Kings ends up being. If they get a second top 5 pick, number 3 and another top 5 pick, that's great value for the number 1 pick. If, the Lakers end up too good to give them that pick this year, and then Sacramento becomes a little more competitive than we all expect in 2018-19, and, it's the third and the 11th or 12th pick for the first pick, then that's not nearly as good a deal for them.
So what's a realistic, observation of Philadelphia now with where they stand? I mean, they won 10 games 2 years ago, 28 last year. You add a healthy roster with the number 1 pick. What are your expectations? What would be a disappointment for this team? I mean, what is the ceiling for this team coming up?
I mean, so much of it still depends on health that it's a little tough to say, but I would say that, barring severe injuries, if you assume that you get a relatively full season from Embiid and Ben Simmons, then, anything in the low 30s would probably be a disappointment. I think a realistic expectation would be somewhere in the high 30s with, a chance to compete for a 500 season, and then at that point probably a playoff berth.
So, Kevin, does this validate what Sam Hinkie did? How much credit do you give Sam Hinkie? Do you give him?
Well, it's interesting because I've been following the retweet Armageddon on Twitter today from Sixers
So have
fans.
we.
And it's weird because it's kind of very un-Sam Hinkie, where he wouldn't want you to judge it based on the way things looked at the end. He'd want you to judge it based on the process all along. But, I think certainly part of what he was thinking with acquiring so many draft picks over the years is you have the ability, if you really like a prospect, to go out and make a move like this and be aggressive because of the fact that you've got this stockpile. So, I think, I don't know that any one move validates the process, but it definitely is an example of the kind of thing that Hinkie wanted to have the ability to do.
Do you think now that the Sixers are or should be an attractive free agent? Should they be a player in free agency, and are they an attractive destination all of a sudden?
So they probably should be more than they will be. My observation about NBA players is that they tend to be much more focused on what they see on the court than, the potential that gets fans all excited. And that's why I thought that Brian Colangelo's comment that, we really want to focus on free agency in the summer of 2018 after we've maybe achieved a little bit more, I thought that was really interesting, and that probably matches up with my sense of when they'll have a better chance to attract a marquee free agent.
Yeah, that's the LeBron year, right?
That is LeBron year, yes.
You never know.
There's been rumors of him leaving Cleveland, right? Him and Ben Simmons share the same agent, don't they?
I think it's probably to a warmer weather destination.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA Insider. For the record, the grades that he has posted, you gave the Sixers a B and the Celtics a B+, so slight edge to the Celtics in this one. Yeah,
which reflects that value. But the way that I like to approach it is kind of, if you came out even in the deal, you get a C. Anything better than that is a B or an A. So I do view it as largely a win-win.
All right, Kevin Pelton, of course, here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, appreciate the time as always, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.